I wish I could take credit, by the way, for the fact that our company colors happen to be the Israeli colors, but it is a pure coincidence. So I wish I could say it was completely planned. So I am what people now call a serial entrepreneur, but when I grew up, people called it unfocused, right? I will say that I personally really like serial entrepreneur a lot better. No, it's okay, I'll be here. I like that a lot better. So, but the thing is this, I've always been really obsessed with inefficiencies. So don't ask me why, that's a conversation between me and my psychologist, but I've always been obsessed with inefficiencies. And that's really what's been driving me. So when I moved to Los Angeles from my native country of Denmark, you know, I found a lot of inefficiencies in Los Angeles. And specifically, I got to sort of experience them firsthand as I began working as a literary manager to some of the most influential creators in Hollywood. Among them was Josh Schwartz, who created The O.C., and James Vanderbilt, who wrote Zodiac and The Amazing Spider-Man and so forth. And I also got to experience these inefficiencies really firsthand when I began working as an executive producer on a bunch of shows and movies, among others, The Killing and a show called Burn Notice. And there was one thing, by the way, I have to show this because I'm so proud. Right there. So, right? We invented a hashtag for that called Shimon Peres Selfie. So, but there was this one thing. So as I observed all of these inefficiencies, you know, there was one question or one thing that kept coming up again and again and again as I was, you know, watching either my clients work on shows or movies or when I was producing. And there was this thing, which was, why does the process make it so hard to produce really great work, right? Why does the process make it so hard? Now, I will tell you, when you discover that question, that's really something good for someone who's obsessed with inefficiencies, right? Really, like, that's prime ground for that. So in 2010, I formed UFuse, and we really, to really try and figure out how we could change this process and produce great work. So by the way, I can barely see you, which is okay, but can anyone relate to this question, by the way? Is that sort of a question that other people sort of have noticed? I may be alone, but okay, so I have a few people out there that have experienced this. All right, good. So here's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna talk about how we can improve it, okay? So to do that, I'm gonna talk about three things. I'm gonna talk about rubber bands, okay? I'm gonna talk about startups, and I'm gonna talk about The Killing, okay? And we're gonna figure out what they have in common. But first, I wanted us to take a little bit of a scientific look at how the development and production process for television shows works. So it looks a little bit like this, right? So this is sort of the current paradigm that at least I've experienced a lot. The Israeli TV industry may be different. I have a feeling that some of those people that raise their hand have experienced this paradigm. So, and it's actually not endemic to the TV business. It's actually something you see in most creative businesses. And there are a bunch of reasons for why it looks like this, but one of sort of the major reasons is what a lot of people have been speaking to for the past 2 days, which is that markets are becoming increasingly fragmented, right? They're becoming very fragmented, and creative companies have had to create new business units in order to address this fragmentation. So what's really going on is that we're at a period of time in history where on the larger scale, you know, there have never been more people involved in the development of shows, right? There's really, literally, I mean, there's a bunch of people because all these business units have something to say about that. So, and what happens, or what has happened is that in order to organize this chaos, right? In order to organize this, and in order to organize all of these business units, the people, the projects, the information, companies, they put in place management processes, right? So they put in place management processes to manage people, right? The problem about that is they're not just any type of processes. What they really are is they're very conventional processes, right? because that's what you need in order to manage a business efficiently. You need hierarchies, you need silos, you need centralization, you need these things to run a business at scale, at least in the media business. And what happens is that these processes, these reporting structures and silos are applied directly on top of creative projects. And that is a total paradox, right? It's a total paradox, because the definition of conventional involves doing the same thing, and the definition of creative involves doing something new. So they are in complete juxtaposition to each other. And actually, if you study every significant paper on research, or research on creativity and innovation, you'll see that hierarchies, silos, centralization, standardization, functional teams, everything you need in management theory are literally in direct opposition to creativity and innovation. They thrive in environments of trust, in environments of collaboration, in environments of empowerment, and so forth. So we're really, really, really looking at a paradox. So let's just do a little bit of a little dive into this, okay? So let's look more at, like, how does that actually look on a practical basis? So it actually looks a little bit like this. So, so if you look at on the right-hand side, you have the creative, and on the left-hand side, you have the business. And then you have sort of the dividing line in the middle, and this is sort of the project timeline. So what you have is and sort of the steps in between here and there represent when you physically come together to discuss whatever is going on with the project, right? So you can sort of fill in the blanks of what those meetings are for you and your projects, but that is when the key stakeholders come together to create some form of agreement before moving on. And then what happens is they move directly away from each other, right? Immediately following all this consensus, they just go away. And this is where I think it begins to get really interesting, because sometimes some of the most important decisions, creatively or financially or business-wise, are made there, at the furthest point when they're away from each other, right? You will literally see that some of the most important decisions get made there. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't communication in here in between. It's just that it is typically highly unorganized, highly chaotic, and highly inefficient as people without process try to narrow this gap, right? So that's how it typically looks, okay? So we at UFuse, we call this the creative inefficiency. By the way, this is on a good day, right? That's on a good day. More typically, unfortunately, it looks like this, right? So because the problems really begin to arise if you don't get consensus in this meeting, if there are misunderstandings in that meeting, people pretend like they know what's being said, right? And then they move further and further away from each other. Right, and all right, so here's where we're going to get to the rubber bands, right? So I handed these out, or I didn't, but the staff did. And I thought to myself when I gave them this morning, I was like, people are either going to think this is a very cheap marketing stunt, or they're going to think that the Lance Armstrong Foundation needs to get rid of some bands, right? So both valid, by the way. But the reason I brought these is because I think that they're a really great physical symbol of what it feels like, of what this feels like. Because if you begin to, don't do it because they will break, but if you begin to pull it apart, specifically with your pinkies, and you pull it further and further apart, you can, I'm pretty fit, so I can hold it for a while, but you can only hold it for a certain period of time, and you begin to fatigue, right? You just get tired. And this is literally what that process feels like. It's what it feels like, right? So it's what it feels like if you fight and fight and fight to try and get back in alignment with both. It's both the same feelings on business and creative, right? And what happens is the further we move up, the more we lose our energy and our passion and our momentum, until sometimes we just give up and we're just happy that it gets made, right? So that's sort of, I think this is a very good physical representation. But it also represents something else, which is it also represents the idea. So if you look in the middle, there's this arrow, right? So I put this arrow because I think that really represents the idea, that thing that everyone fell in love with to begin with. And what happens is that that really begins to get stretched in both directions, right? Now, contrary what most creatives will tell you, most ideas actually do have a certain elasticity, right? So they do, contrary to what they will tell you. They do have a certain elasticity. But if you pull the ideas too far apart and try to make them do too many things, try to have the idea include too many things, business concerns, etc., you're going to reach a point where if we do this for long enough, this is going to begin to lose its shape, right? It's going to begin to sort of turn into a disformed rubber band. And there's this point which I like to call the point of no return, that when you get there, you can't recognize what this is, right? Whatever it was that you began with, it's just, you literally will not know what it is anymore. And unfortunately, this happens in my opinion, on a far too frequent basis, right? Now, you may feel the pain of this, both business and creative. But the real victim are the ideas, right? The lifeblood of creative organizations are the real victims. You and me, we're just collateral damage, right? We're just collateral damage. But the real victim is the idea. So, have I gotten you depressed enough, by the way? All right. I thought sort of we have 2 great days, and then just before the last, I'm just going to make you feel horrible. So that's the end of the presentation. No. So that's it. No. So how do we fix this, right? Because the real question is, how do we fix this? I actually think part of the solution lies with startups. At least that's my opinion. So I really love this definition of a startup. This is from a book called The Lean Startup by Ergries. And it says, a startup is a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That is like every project I've ever been involved in, right? Literally. That is every single TV show I've ever been involved in. So, if that is the definition, there are others, right? So if that's the definition of a startup, maybe they actually have a lot in common with our projects, right? In fact, they do, if you really begin to analyze it. So, great startups are typically disruptive, right? So what sort of one of the hallmarks of a great startup is, in fact, that they aim with a passion at disruption, right? Democratize information, democratize transportation. They aim at a market inefficiency. Well, guess what? Great creative products, they do the same. As witnessed by a lot of the conversation we've had today, Mad Men's come up a bunch of times. But literally, right? Great creative projects, great TV shows will go straight at a market inefficiency and cause disruption. It happens all the time. So they have that in common. The second thing is they both operate under extreme limited time and resources. Same thing, startups typically have a very limited runway and very limited resources. By the way, is this also somebody you guys can recognize? Does that limit resources? Or are we in the country of abundant resources for projects? Right? So, and the last thing is this, there are more, but I just sort of want to highlight a few, is that startups, at least I would say sort of really great ones, right? They really have a purpose. I don't know how many of you guys have spent time in sort of startups, but watching Adam earlier, you can kind of you can sense that there's a real purpose to what they're doing, right? And that's one of the greatest things, because they, startups sort of believe that it's possible to change the paradigm. And guess what? Most creative projects, they have the same thing. In fact, that's what happens when they become successful, right? Okay, and the list goes on and on and on. So really, let's just say that they have enough in common. So check this out. What if we were to treat our projects as if they were a startup? Like what if we're actually to look at them like we're starting a new company, a new organization, all right? So let's walk through that for a second. So what if we're just going to play with this, right? We're just going to speculate for a second. But what if you were to do what a lot of startups do in the founding stages? Which is, what if you were to get the key stakeholders for your project together at an early stage and together define the vision, not the creative vision, but the purpose and the mission for the project together, right? What if you were to do that? What if you were to define the goals, the common goals, right? The common goals for the project. What were you to define that? What are you to define the values, right? Not hidden agendas, but common goals. What if you were to do that? And what if you were to define, see if we get there. Here we go. All right, we're gonna go here. There we go. And what if you were to define the actual roles and responsibilities of that project? What if you spend time understanding what's best for each individual project instead of forcing them into standardized, conventional processes that are inherited from your existing organizations? What if you were to create new for them instead of just bringing the way you work standardly into it? What would that look like? And what would that look like if you were to apply that to a TV show? What if you were to apply some of these principles? Well, that's what we did in The Killing, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So when we were putting The Killing together, it's been a few years since we did this, so we didn't do it in such an organized manner. I'm trying to sort of distill this for you. But we knew that we had a project that was extremely sensitive to the conventional development processes, right? So we had a project with extremely complex storytelling. We had a project that at that time was not a show that people were looking for because it was a serialized arc, right? And we had a very, very complex narrative structure and basic, that was it. So we knew that from the beginning, we had to, I'll bring it back. We had to narrow the gap. We knew from the beginning that we had to narrow this, right? Or there was a chance that we were going to lose the idea, we're going to lose what we fell in love with. So here's what we did. Before we pitched the show, right? So here's how it works traditionally. When you, typically when you sell, there are obviously exceptions, but typically when you sell a format, you send a couple of the first episodes to the executives that you want to sell it to, and then you pray that they watch it, right? You pray that they have the time to watch it themselves. But what you do is you prepare in case they didn't, right? So you don't want them to look bad and walk into the room and say, so tell me about the first 4 episodes. How do you like them, right? So what you do is you just sort of prepare and you make sure that you can pitch it politely without them really putting them on the spot. So we were a little bit nervous about doing that. So what we did is we sent all 10 hours of subtitled Danish television to the executives we wanted to sell it to. And then we said, we will see you when you've seen it, right? So we told them we wouldn't actually meet with them until they had seen all 10 episodes. Now, it took a really long time. I will tell you, it took a really long time. But what happened is they began watching it at the different, specifically at AMC. And what happened is people began to fall in love with the show. It's a terrific show, the original show, and I like to say mine as well, but it's a terrific show. And people began falling in love with it. And what we as the producers did is we began having conversations with them very, very early on. So we spent a lot of time talking to them before we even sat down and had a pitch with them. So once we went in, the 3 things were actually already in place because we've been talking to the executives about this in the studio. So everyone had an extremely strong emotional attachment to the project, right? It spoke to everyone in different ways, yet it spoke to everyone in similar ways. We had a lot of conversations before we went in about emotions. Like we had a lot of conversations about the impact that we thought this show could have, and we had a lot of conversations really about what appealed to us about it. And what happened is everyone involved in this had something at stake. So everyone had something at stake in wanting to see this thing happen. This is before we pitch it. everyone was beginning to get deeply invested in this show. And I will tell you, by the way, I'm proud to say that I really think that is reflected in the remake, specifically the first season, which is what we're discussing. And I will tell you, going on set was an incredible experience there in the first season. It was really, really wonderful. So we had that in place. The second thing is, we knew that we were going to aim for disruption. In fact, we really thought we had an opportunity to do something new and something really different and so forth. Now, in fact, we sort of made it our mission, and some would then argue that we went a little bit too disruptive, because I don't know how familiar you guys are with the fact of how we ended the season 1 of the American version of The Killing, but we ended it by not telling anyone who killed Rosie Larson, which caused an uproar like anything I've ever seen before. So we were disruptive. I'm very happy to say that. So the final thing is, we identified the shared goals, the shared objectives, what challenge that we have, and so forth. So it was a real team effort, even before we had sold the project, right? So just to sort of like walk through it, it still to this day sort of stands as one of the greatest working experiences of my life. We knew we had something special. We worked as one unit to really protect this, and we worked together to solve whatever challenges we did. And I really like sort of what we did. By the way, from having more rain than any other television show in history to casting an unknown Swedish actor as one of the leads, information flowed freely across organizations. And this is one of the most interesting things about having started the process this way, is that there was very little fear, and there were very few egos, and it was a lot about coming together to solve these things. The creative vision flourished, and I'm very happy to say I think the show did as well, and we were lucky that we hit a nerve with critics and audiences alike. So we got very great reviews in season 1, we got great ratings, we got a DJ award and nominated for 6 Emmys, and then of course that all changed at the end of season 1, when we became overnight the single most hated show on television. But that just, is a topic for another conversation, right? So we're going to do that in a different presentation, okay? So, but really, I just want to get to this. What it ended up looking like was that our process actually ended up looking like this, right? This is how our process actually looked. And you may look at this, and you may think to yourself, that's great, that's fine, but my show's different. What I'm working on is very different. It's not The Killing. I don't have time to sit there and watch 10 hours and so forth. And you know what? You're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. I don't think you can replicate the way we did it exactly. You might, but I don't think so. But what's so interesting is, projects like The Killing, they are rare. But what we've spent a lot of time doing at my company is we've actually studied a lot of industries outside of Hollywood. We've studied the construction industry. We've studied the startup business, as I mentioned, and so forth. And what's really interesting is that in those worlds, they have actually developed techniques, like real techniques, for how to get a group of stakeholders together to create a shared vision, right? And as you can see here, I'm sort of showing a little bit of there. So instead of spending endless hours like we did, right, instead of endless hours getting everyone to watch this subtitled Danish show, or in this case, your subtitled Israeli show, there are actually tools available to apply this startup logic. There are actually tools available out there to do that, and it's much, much quicker than what we did, and you can actually discover the core of the projects you're working on together with your stakeholders. And I will say this, regardless of what type of project it is. So these are some of the projects we've worked on in the past few years. So these are workshops we put on. So we've worked with the Eurovision Song Contest in 2013. We're working with the Eurovision Song Contest in 2014. These are people we work from dramas to marketing campaigns to, we've worked with MoMA, a bunch of companies, a bunch of big creative companies. And what's really interesting is that what you're seeing executives, creators, people, stakeholders coming together as groups across organizations and hierarchies, using these tools to create a unified vision for the project that connects all of them to the project emotionally. You're seeing them identify exactly how they want the project to be disruptive. You're seeing them, and this is one of my favorite things, you're seeing them come up with goals as a group that they want to accomplish, and then solving how they're going to solve those challenges as a group right? As a group, not one side trying to pitch the other side on the solutions, but as a group. It's pretty spectacular. It's all done together. And I think sort of the most important thing is this, we've done a bunch of this now, is you're seeing transparency. Sort of what really gets set up here is transparency, right? What really gets set up is this environment of trust. And those things, just so you know, those are the things that when you do your research, that those are the things that really spark creativity and innovation. That environment, right? Now we're not just, I want to be very clear, we're not talking about creativity by committee. Okay, we're not talking about the idea itself. Like a startup, that needs to rest in the hands of the visionaries, right? What we're seeing is we're seeing everyone come around as a group to figure out how to make that happen. That's what we're seeing, right? So what you're really seeing is you're seeing this amazing environment of creativity and innovation. That's what you're seeing. And this is actually something that you can do, right? This is something that you can do in your projects. Because what you really, so I've just put in network, studio, and producers, but in this Venn diagram, you can kind of fill in whoever are the sort of the key organizations that are working on your projects. And the most important things, they're kind of simple, and there are tons of tools available out there in the world. But there's no reason why, right? Well, there are plenty of reasons why. But I don't see a reason why you don't want to spend time with the key stakeholders before you really move full speed ahead. I don't see a reason why you don't want to take a few hours and discover together what the vision is for this, what the mission is. I don't see a reason why you as a group don't want to sit down and talk about the shared goals and the shared challenges and opportunities. If you were to start a company, you'd do the same thing, right? And in essence, that is what you're doing for that period of time. You're creating this organization with its own rules. I mean, you've done it, so you know these projects develop their own values, their own rules, their own processes. Why not do it consciously instead of allowing people to bring in processes, unless they're relevant, bring them in from existing organizations? Why don't you do that? Right? Why don't you sit down and discuss? Right? And we're at the core of this, what we're talking about what I think is sort of one of the great themes about this conference. We're talking about creativity and innovation. So why would you not sit down and figure out what it would take to create the right environment for that? Right? There's plenty of articles out there about the values that need to be present for creativity and innovation to flourish. Trust, communication, the room to fail. It's everything that's counterintuitive to conventional processes, but you can change it. I've seen it. I know it can be done, so you can do it too. There's this wonderful quote here. Again, as you can tell, this is the second quote by this guy, so I'm clearly obsessed with this book. I love this. I love this quote. I love this one because it's so simple. What if we stopped wasting people's time? What would they do with it? We have no real concept of what's possible, right? So I want to close it out here now. I wanted to say the one thing is this, sort of at the end. There's actually a couple things I want to say. The first thing is this. I actually think that throwing yourself into working this way, it requires a lot of courage. Okay, so it requires a lot of courage to work this way because you've got to be willing to sit in front of another person who essentially is paying you and tell them what you think you're good at and not good at. Stuff like that. It's very challenging, specifically for producers, because our thing is we can do everything. Don't worry, we got it, right? So this is the opposite. So it requires a lot of courage. But the thing about courage, and this is why we put the hashtag creative courage on your bracelet. The thing about this is this. It's so awesome. What you want to do, seriously, what you want to do is you do want to throw yourself into the unknown. That's actually what you want to do. Because the one thing you can always bring with you, right? So the one thing that you can always count on when you throw yourself into the unknown is you got your creativity, right? Literally, I'm telling you, when you throw yourself into the unknown, that's the thing you got. If you throw yourself into the known, you're going to do what you've done before again and again and again. So you actually want to throw yourself into this. So that wraps it up for me. The one thing I want to say is this. I'm a big fan, as you can tell, of hashtags, etc. And if anyone follows me on Instagram over the past 2 days, as you saw with Shimon Peres selfie, I think that one of the most important things is, if you think this conversation is interesting, then embrace it and you start using the hashtags. We have people across sort of the world that are beginning to use these as hashtags and applying this startup logic. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon that's occurring. And you are always welcome. So this is the 21st century. I'm 41, but I feel like I'm pretty young. So here's the thing. People ask, can I have your email? I said, hit me on Twitter, right? So if you have any questions, there's my handle, and you're very welcome to reach out to me. So thank you so much.